two teenagers discover a lost boy in an iceberg in the promising, though flawed, first episode of one of the greatest animated series ever made. This is Avatar Explained for episode 101, The Boy in the Iceberg. Part 1, Synopsis. There are three characters who are important in this episode: Aang, Sokka, and Katara. Aang is the titular Avatar. He is 12 years old, very energetic, very childish, and he has a lot of room to grow. There's Katara, more mature, and filled with longing to leave her unfulfilling life in the Southern Water Tribe and become a much better waterbender. She is the last waterbender in the Southern Water Tribe, and that forms a large part of her very identity. The third is Sokka. He's older than Katara, but he acts younger. He's immature. He thinks he's a great warrior, but he's not. And so much of his identity is built around this idea of him as a warrior defending his tribe against the Fire Nation, who are the main antagonists of the show. So the show starts with Katara and Sokka discovering Aang. They're having an argument. Sokka is insulting Katara's waterbending. And then Katara, in her anger, cracks open an iceberg, and there is Aang, the last airbender. They discover he's an airbender pretty quickly, which shocks them because all the airbenders were wiped out 100 years ago in a genocide committed by the Fire Nation, which is explained in the show's beautifully animated and very informative opening credits sequence, a part of which is repeated at the beginning of every episode from here on out. This sequence is perfect, just about. It somehow never feels like an info dump, never feels too long or too dry. It's very quick, it's very succinct, and that's a major reason why it works as well as it does. It explains everything perfectly. So we have these three. They go down to the tribe, which is unsure about Aang. They think he might be a Fire Nation spy. They have reason to be afraid of the Fire Nation, since it has done so much damage to their village. Sokka does not trust Aang at all, nor does he trust Appa, Aang's mount and friend, a sky bison. But Katara does, and not just because his childlike wonder is the complete opposite of everything she's used to, growing up in this war-torn village. First thing he asks her is to go penguin sledding with him, but also because he represents a future to her, a future where she can go off and learn what she wants to learn and be who she wants to be. It's not a surprise that she's interested in him, nor is it a surprise that he falls in love with her. I mean, she is, as a 14-year-old girl, very attractive to him, and she's kind and empathetic, and she really works to help him. So they go and investigate the Fire Nation ship away from their village. Everyone has been warned at this village to not go near the Fire Nation ship, but Aang convinces her to take the risk. He encourages her to really open up. However, the villagers were right, because this Fire Nation ship is booby-trapped, and when they stumble into one of these traps, it alerts a Fire Nation ship that's crossing by. On this ship is Prince Zuko, the chief antagonist at this point in the show. He is the character most directly opposed to the protagonists. And so we have our conflict, our premise, our setup. It's all very well done, though it can be a little clumsy in parts. Part 2, Analysis. A few jokes don't quite work. The humor in this show is never as good as it could have been, and it does get a little tiring, especially early on. Later on it's better, though not perfect. More importantly, the characterizations are on point. They're very clean, very sharp. We know exactly who Aang is, we know exactly who Katara is, we know exactly who Sokka is. And we know that through how the show depicts the characters' reactions to different points, different ideas, different situations. It's all very interesting. The magic system of this world is called bending. Basically, there are people with the power to control a certain element, whether that's air, fire, water, or earth. This could be really complicated and difficult to explain, but the show does it perfectly in its opening sequence. And as importantly, the very first part of the show after that sequence gives us two characters on each side of the bending versus non-bending divide. We have Katara, who is a bender, and Sokka, who is not. He's mocking her for it, because he thinks himself this macho warrior man, which he really isn't. But you understand why he thinks that. He's the oldest man left in the tribe. He feels a responsibility to take care of everyone else. Meanwhile, you also feel Katara's desolation, her isolation from everyone else, being the only bender, the only person with this fantastical, magical ability to control water, which she rightly thinks is really interesting and powerful, but no one else is there to help her. But of course, these characters are not just defined in how they relate to the bending system, they're also defined in how they relate to each other. Of course, we see a nice classic sibling rivalry between Sokka and Katara. It's nothing special, but it works. And we really do see how different Aang is from everyone else. His childishness is not the best fit for this wartime situation, but it is a burst of life and energy and enthusiasm, and it's welcome. These characters have a lot to learn. That's also shown. Katara knows she has a lot to learn. She wants to become a better bender. And though at this point her character flaws aren't as readily apparent as they will become later, it is clear that she is a little on the naive side, a little on the idealistic side. Whereas Sokka is more cynical. Like most cynics, he thinks this makes him more intelligent, but really it cuts him off to a lot of the realities of the world, and it stops him from really self-introspecting and understanding his weaknesses. Aang, of course, has the most apparent flaws. He's this little kid, and he has a lot to learn before he can take on the Fire Nation like he has to save the world. I should also point out that the animation in this show is incredible. It's very fluid, especially for its time and budget, and it's really beautiful. This is genuinely gorgeous animation. I'd like to call special attention to the penguin sledding sequence. This could have been just a footnote. It could have easily been something the show just didn't depict or depicted very briefly, but instead the show gives real attention to it and it pays off. It is a beautiful sequence. It's very vivid, very energetic. It really conveys the enjoyment it holds for the characters. For Aang, this is just another joyous occasion for a guy who is always seeking fun and excitement. And for Katara, it's a real break from the drudgery of her life and a real opportunity to indulge in something she wants, which is different for her and really powerful for her. The animation in the show is gorgeous overall, and it just gets better as it goes on. This is a stunning show. Above all, this episode makes you want more. It's a great teaser for everything the show has to offer. I wouldn't call it the show's best episode or anything close to it, but it's exciting, it's engaging, it's energetic. First episode of a show is the test. It's where a person comes and watches the show and decides if they want to watch more of it. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. And the test of a first episode, a premiere, is whether they can convince those curious viewers to watch more. And the show does a great job of this with its first episode. It's quite applaudable, and I hope y'all enjoy it as much as I do. Part 3, Context. So, for reference, this is how this episode works in the context of all the other episodes of the show, so I will be discussing other episodes. I assume that most people who are watching this video have seen the entire series. It's been out for a decade and a half now, just about. But if you haven't, and you don't want to know what happens in the rest of the series, don't watch beyond this point. Okay? Alright. So, let's talk about Katara and Aang, or Katang. It's really there from the beginning, at least from Aang's standpoint. He immediately falls for Katara and doesn't look back from there. There's not a real point in the show where he wonders if he's really in love with Katara, or he wonders if he really wants to be with her. No, it's just Katara from the beginning. And gradually, as he grows up, he convinces her to fall for him. It's not bad. It's not as bad as some people make it out to be, but it's also not exactly great. And it's not dynamic. There's no real sense of evolution. Aang starts as a kid in love with a girl who's older than him. She's the first girl he sees, period, after waking up from his 100-year sleep. And she's kind and generous and good. And that's all there is to it. Over the course of the series, they grow closer and get together. The best relationships between characters convey a sense of character growth, but there isn't really that here. That's not to say this relationship is bad. It's quite good, and there are some really beautiful and romantic moments in it, and we'll see those later on. But I will say that as a whole, the show's weak point is romantic relationships. It's much better at depicting friendships and family relationships than romantic love. Also, there are some parts that aren't quite as sketched out as they could have been. Iroh is simpler here. Zuko is not nearly as compelling as he will later become. It's a great teaser, as I said before, but it's far from the best episode of the show, and it doesn't quite convey the show's potential. It's a foundation, but nothing more. The show only gets better from here. It gets more beautiful, gets better written, the characters become more dynamic and more interesting and more explosive, and the show as a whole becomes a much more rewarding watch. That doesn't mean it's bad now, it's far from it. But it does mean that the show is only going to get better from here. There are a few dips in the road, but as a whole, the quality of the show greatly improves over time. And if you are a first-time viewer and you have continued to watch past this point, you should know that you're in for a great time. The show is a wonderful experience. And if you're a returning viewer and you haven't seen the show in a while, you're also in for a great time. It's probably better than you remember it being. If you watched it as a kid and you're worried that it might not hold up, don't be. It holds up extremely well. This is a great episode of television, but it's more notable for what it leads to than what it is. It's the start of something truly fantastic. One thing the show is great at is character development, and I'd like to call attention to that as it applies to a seemingly minor detail, the title of the episode. The title of episode 101 is The Boy in the Iceberg. The title of episode 321, the final episode of the show, is Avatar Aang. So even that showcases Aang's development from a little kid with childish tendencies to a fully grown, fully realized Avatar. Aang is not my favorite character, and his development is relatively minor compared to the development of some other characters, most notably Zuko, but nevertheless his character development is still quite good and quite layered, and it showcases how committed the show truly is to really fleshing out all these characters and diving into the possibilities surrounding them. It's a very smart show, it's a very heartfelt show. It's a show that never misses an opportunity to dive into the psyches of its characters, and that's a major reason why people still watch it all these years later. The world may suck you in, but it's the characters that hold you there. So thank you for watching. Like, comment, subscribe, donate to my Patreon if you like what you saw today, and don't forget to tune in to the next Avatar analysis. Adios, comrades!